This episode is brought to you by Granicus and the Macro Group. Welcome everybody to another episode of BTT Discussions, aka the Black Tech Talent Podcast. I have a very special guest with me as always, Surfield. You're a technical lead at Spotify, I believe. And, we met,
Yes.
I want to say, beginning of 2020, end of 2019. I was in a program with my other company, the Premium Experience, and I had just finished Founder Gym, and they sent out kind of a newsletter with all the people who were in the cohort. And so you saw me in there and ended up reaching out, and that was pretty awesome because I was like, I wonder if people really look at this, you know what I mean? And, because every program says, oh, we have a network of, other founders and investors and angels and mentors, and, upon completion, we'll send it out, blah, blah, blah. And so it was actually pretty cool to see someone take an interest in what we were doing at Premium after completing that cohort. So we've chatted a few times since then, and now I get to have you on the podcast and learn a little bit more and share your experience with my guests as well. So welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. It feels good to be here. I think that's one of those things that is very interesting. It's when I kind of linked up and found out about you through that process, I was also going through a process of working on a fund in of itself that's kind of now mutated and become something else. So like I'm a GP of a part of a different fund now, but it's a Pan-Africa fund.
Okay.
So we're actually making moves out there, invested in companies in Africa, trying to find them talent. So we may actually need to chop it up a little bit more about like how we can work with Black tech talent as well on that opportunity. But I always find that like that the verbiage of your network is really your net worth. Now that I'm in like that space of VC and tech and actually like putting companies together, it is so true and it is so valuable because like you never know where you begin and where you end up as like being able to be helped or help another person. It just keeps evolving as tech. It's like that iterative process of just keep growing, keep evolving.
Definitely. I'm a big believer in that as well. And, that's one of those things that you don't really know it. Like people can tell it to you, you can repeat it, but you don't really know it till you've done something consistently enough to see that happen, right? To see somebody that you went to school
100%.
with, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, it comes back tenfold, or somebody you helped and mentored and gave advice, and now they're successful, and you're like, hey, we're doing a fundraiser for this. Can you donate? Or meeting somebody who's at one company and it may be irrelevant to what you're doing now, but then they're at another company or they start your own and it's a perfect setup and you've had time to build those relationships. So for people listening, especially people who are getting in the game and they're new or they're more introverted, like it's really a real thing, but you do have to be consistent and foster relationships, even if they're not really, I don't want to use the term of value, but even if they're not, relevant to what you're doing at the moment, it's still good to do. For me, for a long time, it was hard to do in the sense of how I was, meaning I wanted to always be the one bringing value. So sometimes I would feel like, well, I can't bring value to your situation right now, so I'll come back when I can. So I had to kind of learn as well from that perspective, to just be more open and allow people to maybe be the first person to bring value to me, even if don't feel like I can bring value at the moment. So sometimes people don't do it, not necessarily because they're, if you can't help them now, they're not interested. Sometimes it's the opposite. And they're like, I want to be able to reciprocate. And if I can't, I may not be able to foster this relationship. But the other cool thing has been, when you're working at a certain level, it's not high maintenance relationships to keep, right? If people get a good vibe from you, they're open to talk whenever you're ready as well, right? Just keep in touch. So definitely a big advocate of your network is your net worth.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's like, I think when people think about that engagement, they think of it as like every engagement is this long drawn out process of fostering a relationship. But when you're fostering a relationship with people who are also driven and goal oriented and like doing their things, you find that relationship in and of itself is very low maintenance, right? It's like you gel, you figure out, and then you just keep circling back to these ideas of like, how can I give value or get value at the right time. And like we're talking on the podcast right now, it's one of those right times, and it's kind
Right.
of ceremonious, right? It's like it kind of worked out. But I will say, and then we'll really get into this. I think there's two layers when you're talking about engineering specifically, and like I used to be that engineer that only wanted to like delve into the code, didn't want to talk to people, just want to write code, give me like requirements, and I'm going to spec and scope that out. But as you develop a career, and we'll talk about like my specific career journey, right? It's like you'll start seeing that glass ceiling that they talk about, which is normally like race or all of these socioeconomic stuff, right? But it's also in that interpersonal communication, right? It's like when you think about a company, right? Like it's the concept of groups of people doing things together. And the way that groups of people like congregate and create community is through speech. If you don't talk to people, if you don't meet people, if you don't network with people, you are going to stunt your growth. So you're going to create that glass ceiling that you say you can never break out of, right? And it took me a while to even get there as an engineer, but I actually saw that like the more I opened up and the more I started talking to product people, biz people, all these other people, the more opportunities were given to me, right? Because again, like there's this translation mechanism. It's like tech is for the engineers, right? But you can't do that tech without the business requirements.
Right.
Someone needs to sit in that gap, and the dude who sits in that gap is the person that can become the director, the VP, the CTO. Sometimes those people are the CEOs, and if that's what you're looking to do, you really have to flex that other muscle, which is like talking to people. Because the name of the game at any point, right? It's like companies spin up and spin down. People have a longevity to them.
Definitely. I mean, it's so true, and that's it's respecting what other people bring to the table and their value, and also I think it comes from that it's a saying, it's kind of a mind frame we have here in America when you're just a regular citizen, right, who doesn't necessarily need to network, right? Especially in the past. Like right now, things are changing. People are turning their hobbies into small businesses and side hustles. And, there's just a lot of opportunities, and people are waking up to the fact that whatever you make at your day job doesn't have to be the totality of your income. But I think just, throughout our history here, it's really been, like, don't ask your boss for something. They know when you deserve a raise, or they know when you deserve an opportunity, and just work hard. Keep your head down and work hard. You're not here to make friends. You're here to, climb the ladder. And that has hurt a lot of people, even like, within our culture. I know for me, growing up, like my parents used to talk like that. You know what I'm saying? Even within the household would be like, I'd be, oh, I would love this computer for my birthday, or this camera. And it's like, oh, we know what you want. If we feel you deserve it, you'll get it.
Yeah.
And really, it was more like we were poor.
Yep.
So really, it was more like they saw the price of it and were like, we can't afford that, so we're not going to entertain that talk. But instead of really just discussing it from that point of view, it became more of like this mystical, godlike thing where it's like, we know all, and we know who deserves what, and you'll receive it when the time's right, and these type of things. And then that created a lot of disappointment when you felt like you did put in the work and you didn't get what you're supposed to get. So when you translate that into kind of the way the world's been working, and specifically corporate, that creates a lot of disdain that people have, a lot of the greed and stepping on people, and a lot of the disappointment when you're like, why put in all this work? Why did Thomas get this and I didn't? And it's like, Thomas went golfing with the boss, and he had dinner with the boss and his wife, and you didn't. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the quality of work. You're slightly better and you show up slightly earlier, but he put in that time outside of work, he might get a little bit further than you, right? He's built that relationship. And so it's definitely about, getting in and getting that time. I know even in entrepreneurship, I felt that way, where I'll spend so much time building my businesses and like really trying to, like I said, be prepared for when I do meet people. I got all my ducks in a row. And then I see other people who really didn't put in any work, didn't really even have a product, build the relationships I wanted, but they spent all their time kicking it with the people that I was trying to get to, right? So I mean, it's a big thing, and I share those stories so that the listeners can really kind of understand what we're talking about, and what we mean by your network and how you
Listen,
really have to build. It's the personal time you put into.
you hit the nail on the head, right? It's like there's two entrapments there, right? It's like this concept of like networks and how they can affect you, and then there's this concept of just like the understanding of money and power,
Mm,
right? And it's like it's a lot of different strange dichotomies. It's like from that era that our parents grew up in, where it's just like don't move the chain, don't do all of these things. It's like they needed money, so they lacked the perception that they could show force and they could show power. Because ideally they would
right,
say like, okay, you're showing this force, you're abrasive, and they would lose that job or they would lose that thing to not put the food on the table, right? And it's just like those constructs put you into like this world of like the where it's like you can only do but so much. Like
right.
if you only do enough, someone will give this thing to you. But if you really look at the history of right, like America's built on the concept of takers. Right?
Exactly,
You got to do what you got to do
exactly.
and you got to take what you want, right? And it's like once you start breaking into that dichotomy and you start seeing it, it's like it doesn't mean that you have to actually do the work. Because if you
Yeah,
think about like the concept of a corporation, is the CEO the hardest person working person at a company? I would
no.
say no. Right? Right? It's like built into the framework, right? But that guy
Yeah,
probably has the most connections company wide so that he can understand the ins and outs and the flows of the company, right? But he has many workers that work for him, right? So it's again, it's that same concept when they say like, all right, you've never seen a person who has 4 jobs that's rich, right?
right.
Because they're working for money and not making money work for them. It's that same thing when you think about the corporate structure. You think about like anything where it's like, all right, cool. If you don't have a network, you're working for every dollar. But if you can put a network of smart individuals together, you can leverage them. They can leverage you, and you can figure out ways to build systems that generate you all more money and power over time.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
So we've kind of jumped into some of the gems we'll be dropping throughout the podcast.
Love it, love it.
I want the listeners to know a little bit more about you and your
Cool.
background, and give that credibility to the conversation we're
Love
having.
it, love it.
So, usually the first question I'll ask is, what got you into tech? What was kind of that first spark that made you believe, especially as a black man, that it was for you and that you could excel in it?
Cool. Yeah, it's a long-winded one, but I think it's like I also teach, so I
Hmm.
tell this story a lot because I teach a lot to minorities as well. So it's like I always want to get them on the chain that you can do this. I did this. I look like you can do this. So I'll give you a story. Um, as a kid growing up, I was born in Brooklyn, so over New York. Shout out to the Brooklyn heads. When my parents had my sister when I was about 7, we moved to Rosedale, and I was always a tinkerer. Like I would like open TVs up to see how they're like built. I would like rip apart VCRs to see how they built. So like break things down, put them back together. So my dad decided he was gonna get me a computer. Dad not college educated, mom not college educated, but he was like, yo, something's going on with these computer joints. I'm gonna get him one. So I was the only person in my house who had a computer. So he bought me a computer, and then he bought me a bunch of floppy disks. Like he bought me like like a case of like 4,000 floppy disks because he's like, something's going on here.
Right.
I need to get this. I need to get him right. So I was just online, like figuring stuff out, just messing with stuff, just going on websites, just figuring like how it all worked, right? But at that time, I still didn't really understand it. So I was still thinking of it like the machine as the most important piece, like the hardware. So I actually went to the university. So long story short, let's skip ahead. Um, they put me in some of the best private schools. I did all of that. Then the time comes time to go to college. I go to University of Maryland, and I'm going for a mechanical engineer because I'm like the boxes, the hardware, the machines.
Hmm.
That's where it's at, right? So I get there. I want to be a like designer for cars for BMW USA. That's specifically why I chose that school because BMW USA, like the BMW headquarters, is in Maryland, and they have a linkage with the University of Maryland. So I get there and I meet this fascinating dude by the name of James Green, and he's teaching entrepreneurial science, right? And like that's not even one of my courses in my mechanical engineering degree. But I meet him at a conference at the school, and then he's like, I'm talking to him, and I'm talking to him about like just the idea, like generation and all these things. And he's like, I really want you to come and just sit in on one of my classes, right? So I go to one of his classes, and he brings up a slide on the board. I never forget this, right? It's a freshman class at the University of Maryland, so big school. So think 500 kids in a lecture
Hmm.
room. And he shows a picture, and the picture is of Jamaica, Queens, right? And he asked one simple question: would you ever invest like in real estate here? Right? Everyone looking around. So I raised my hand in this classroom with 500 kids. And I'm like, nah, I wouldn't. And he asked me why. I was like, well, I'm from there. I know exactly where that is. That's Jamaica, Queens. Ain't nothing over there. He brings up the next slide. His family has owned all of the properties on multiple streets in Jamaica
Oh,
Ave for like the
wow.
last 70 years, right?
Wow.
Right. And now he's teaching entrepreneurial science like at the University of Maryland. He's like the head of that department. So what he was really trying to get us to understand is that like what you see is not truly all that it is, right? You need to like break into things, you need to understand more. So then around this time, this is 2009 when I'm first admitted into University of Maryland, we got the Facebooks launching and all of this stuff. And his whole class was about how software is going to actually take over and eat the world. He's like, here you have these construct of old businesses like GM, machines, and all this stuff. And it's like, but you can generate these companies out of your bedroom with the idea that like software and processes over people and machines, right, can generate so much extra leverage. When you look at that, like that Facebook hockey stick growth, right? It's like 50 engineers can create something that helps a billion people connect, right? So it was this whole idea around that. So long story short, I took that class, loved it, and he got me to change my major over to software engineering, and I never looked back. Never
Awesome.
looked back, and I've been software engineering ever since.
I love that story. That's an awesome story, especially being an entrepreneur, because it does make you have to look at, it's funny. It's like sometimes I'll drive around and I'll be like, especially like if I'm in the suburbs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be like, these people are probably like struggling for extra money.
Mm-hmm.
And when they drive around, they don't see money anywhere.
Yep.
And the reason why I say the suburbs versus the hood, because I'm from the hood.
Mm-hmm.
In the hood, we figure out how to get some money one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need the other piece, right? The financial literacy, what to do when we get our hands on it, how to keep it, how to practice group economics and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
between welfare, food stamps, cash assistance, illegal activities, or there,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody in the hood is into any of that. Some people,
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, their house, the neighborhood they're in is full of their families. They've been there forever, and
Mm-hmm.
they would prefer the hood to change than to leave out of it. But they
Mm-hmm.
have jobs and whatever it may be. So there's money there. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
lot. It's not the same amount. The resources aren't the same, but there's money there. And people go outside and they're like, I mean, I mowed lawns, I shoveled snow, I would just literally sit around and be like, how to get some money, and then I just go try it, right? And that's what made me a good, entrepreneur. Is like I go somewhere and I see a way to get some money out of a situation. But when I'm in the suburbs, it's very dry. People aren't hanging out on the block to even talk to, right? Everybody's in their cars. They pull up to where they're going to. Most likely it's going to be drive through, and they open their garages and they park in their garage and they shut the door. And so there's
Yeah.
no communication. It's harder to hustle. By the time you knock on somebody's door, they're tired of talking to people. They don't know you. They don't trust you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so it does become that perception of you see what you get what you see. And as you mentioned, there's so much more. And so you coming from where you came from and him pointing that out to you was
Mm-hmm.
great. So it's no wonder you switched your major, because you're like, whoa, he just like showed you something that you have been looking at your whole life up to that
Yep.
point, and showed you
Yep.
something different within the same confines.
It's interesting that we even bring this up as a concept, right? It's like that concept of like what they say when they're like Drake lives in the hidden hills, right? Well, the
Mm-hmm.
question is why? Who else
Right.
lives there? Right? Like
Right.
he's not just living there to buy a really nice fancy house, right? Like again, he lives in that same concept where he pulls up to a driveway into his house and he's gone, right?
Right.
But his address, the Hidden Hills, is the place that we all know of and is associated with others like him,
Right.
like other large musicians and all these people, right? So like although they might not be hanging out on the stoop, right?
Right.
There's this shared concept of like these groups of people hang out together and they share those ideas. Now, I think the interesting thing between those two dichotomies is like when you're thinking about the hood, you have like the concept of the stoop, and like me and my homies always hung out on the stoop, and we always shared those ideas. But it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where your network is your net worth, where it's just like we can only share the ideas that are our realities,
Yeah.
right? If no one taught any of us like money and literacy and all that stuff, right? We can't share those ideas. But when you're thinking about like a group of people from the Hidden Hills sitting in Drake's backyard and they're
Right.
talking about the next $100 million, right? They've been taught something. So it's still conversation,
Yep.
right? It's just the conversation is different. It's like, how do we get that? And I think like one of the major things is like that education system is that it's supposed to be that foundation and that core, but it's really doing a disservice to a lot of people.
For sure.
A lot.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And that's something that I've tried to, because, I mentor with a couple different groups. I helped launch the Twin Cities chapter of 100 Black Men. And we just actually Saturday wrapped up our graduation for the Man Code programming. We taught Black male youth 11 to 17 how to code, life
Hey, that's
skills,
great.
career preparedness. We did a gaming competition with them. A lot of them wanted to be YouTubers. We had the Earn Your Leisure guys come speak on
Oh,
via Zoom.
ooh,
We
that's what's
had
up.
Eric
That's
Thomas
dope.
spoke, and we had 3 or 4 guys from Microsoft or from Xbox speak on how to
Hey,
become a game developer, how to get into gaming. So these kids got an awesome
yeah, that's
program
dope.
for our first launch
Man,
and kickoff.
hey,
Um,
I would love to join in too. That sounds
yeah.
dope, man.
So those opportunities, and one of the because the a lot of them were I guess nervous or kind of,
Mhm,
intimidated. And they're really, like I said, 11 to 17. So some of them were really young, scared to ask questions, but they opened up over time. And then there's a
mhm,
cool factor too. We go, who wants to da da da? Nobody wants to kind of be the first one.
mhm.
But obviously they've opened up to us. It's a 12-week program. And one of the
Oh, that's
kids
great.
the other day was like, so like for next year and the years going forward, like at what point do I get trained and help so I can be an entrepreneur? And for me, that was
Ooh,
like the dope feeling. Cause one, we never said y'all it was gonna be the same group every year. You know
yeah.
what I'm saying?
It's like, nah, I'm coming back.
But two, it showed kind of that they have been paying attention and that they are
Yep.
interested on a different level more than what they've showed, from us, pushing them to participate, but it's in them and
Mhm,
they want to do it and they've seen what they want to see. So that was just a awesome feeling. And for us, that's a program. So
mhm,
100 Black Men, we're mentors regardless. So they'll stay with us
mhm.
regardless as their mentors. But that program will go on and evolve as we kick it off. This was our pilot. It's been happening in other places, and Phil Terrell, he's part of the 100 Black Men here in the Twin Cities. Um, so he actually works at Microsoft, and he kicked it off, and it's been
Mhm,
in Atlanta and other major markets. But typically, it was a 1 day event. It was like kind of
mhm.
like a 1 day hackathon style event,
Yep.
and we turned it into a 12-week program. So this was the first time that has happened, and it's been an awesome experience. But that I bring that up because now we're giving these opportunities for our youth to learn kind of advanced things, talk to advanced people, so that by the time they are 16, 17, they are the person in their network that can bring the net worth and tell their friends and their cousins and whoever it may be, like, hey, there's other ways to approach this. And the cool thing is, we're in a space, and I'm 31, I'll be 32 on the 31st of March, and so
Oh,
all of us are kind
hey,
of in
happy
that same
birthday.
range. Thank you. We're all
I'm
in
the
the
22nd of March is mine. I'm be
hey.
30.
Perfect.
Aries
So
blood, Aries blood.
yes. No wonder we connected.
Yeah.
So but we're all kind of in that same range of 30s and up. And so like we taught these kids, like, what do you want to be? I want to be a YouTuber, I want to be a gamer, I want to be this. And we were actually able to give them game on how to, like, not only pursue that, but how to talk to their parents about wanting to pursue that and what resources to show
It's one of the
them.
gems.
And so now it's not like, when I was coming up and trying to find similar type of resources, even as like a young adult, things like Score and stuff like this, it was still a lot of it was focused on brick and mortar. Nobody was talking about anything about being no gamer, no social media influencer,
Mm-hmm.
anything of that nature. So um at the end of the day, we can talk about things of the past that they may want to be, but we're also able to prepare them for the future of what's to come and what's relevant now. And so they could be like, I want to be a gamer when I grow up, and then we bring in
That's great work.
three Xbox developers for them to talk to, right?
It's great work, man.
Thank you. So and like I said, I bring that up in our conversation we're having today to say that there are a lot more resources today, and there's a lot of more opportunities for people to expand their network, even as young kids or young adults.
I think that's one of the things that you're bringing up right now. That was like, first, great work. Keep doing that work. It's needed, right? And I think that's one of the big things. It's like you got to realize that kids are sponges, and there's curiosity, and it's inert to being a child. Like the reason why my life worked out different is because my dad decided to get me a computer. He didn't even understand it, right? But he
Right.
was like, "Yo, I'm gonna get him this. He gonna figure something out, right?" And like that opened that space of curiosity, and it's just like I wasn't special. I was just a kid.
Right.
All kids have that, right? But they have to be open to these opportunities. They have to be given the chance, right? Because
Yeah.
like here you are, you said you took 100 kids and you brought them and they were shy, and at the end they're talking about coming next year, right? Like
Right.
the kids, the kids want to do things. They want to be stimulated. They want to be activated. So great work, and I think like that's really what we need. It's just more kids immersed in those experiences because again, like when you think about like your days going back to the hoods, like I remember wanting to be a basketball player. I remember wanting to be a rapper because that's all I ever saw. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know I could make the money that I'm making writing code because no
Right.
one around me ever wrote code, right?
Yep.
Like we were using apps where we're again, we were always using things, we're always buying things, but we're never understanding the process on how they get made. And it's like now understanding that, it's like I want to unlock that for more individuals. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. So your dad gets you this computer.
Cool.
You get to learning, then you go to Maryland, you switch your major. So what was your experience going forward from that?
Great question. And I love telling this story because this is the story of resilience, right? Like, all right, cool. I switched my major over to computer science, and like you would think it's smooth sailing. It's not. It's extremely hard, right? Because like again, I've never really been in this space before. I was always like mechanically driven. I had a computer, but like I never even understood how websites worked, right? Like I would go on and figure out how to like build TVs and stuff like that, right? So I actually did extremely poorly my first semester, right? Because like software, as most people know at a big school, is like 500 kids in a room. Their parents are probably like software engineers, so like they come in with a lot of concepts. So I didn't really understand how things work. So long story short, didn't do great on my first semester, and then I have a decision to make. I could either go back home or spend another grip retaking classes at University of Maryland because I'm an out-of-state student. So I'm like, nah, I'm coming back home. I come home. I do 1 year at RVCC, the community college, right? Did their 2 year degree in 1 year. This time I'm like, yo, I'm gonna learn this joint. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna knock it out. I did 1 year, completed their 2 year degree. Boom, like passed with flying cover, and I'm like, now I'm nice. I know everything about software because like that's where that bravado comes on again. I start a company, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
start building websites for small businesses and companies, right? So like that's what I'm doing full time. And now I'm finishing up school part time because I'm like, I still want to finish the school joint. I go to NGIT, get my bachelor's, then I double up and get my master's from NGIT. So now I have a master's in computational data science from NGIT, right? And all through that portion, for the first 3 years, I owned my own company. One of those companies that I was working from, they bought me out and they were like, yo, we want you to come work with us full time. That was the first startup experience. That company went under in 6 months because again, startup game is vicious. So
Mm-hmm.
work for them. That company went under in 6 months. Hopped to another company that was Jack Threads. They had been around for 12 years. So I'm like, oh, I'm solid. That company goes under in 9 months, right? Then I bumped to WeWork. And as we all know, what WeWork's going through right now, I
Mm-hmm.
stayed at WeWork for about 3 years, but I saw the writing on the wall. So again, this is that other part of the game where it's like, all right, cool. I've seen two companies fail twice, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not just coming in here to work. I'm trying to figure it out. So like I go in there, I'm starting meeting with business people. I'm meeting with data scientists. I'm trying to understand the numbers. I'm trying to understand what's going on. 3 years is going by, and I'm like, yo, this company's gonna blow up. I'm telling people at the company it's gonna blow up. This is gonna blow up. It's not gonna work out right. So I dip. I go to Venmo. I dip, go to Venmo. 6 months later is when the IPO joint happened. And then everyone called me to ask me how I figured it out. I was like, bro, I was a part of this 2 companies ago. I seen two
Right.
companies fail. I know the writing's on the wall, right?
Right.
So now I'm at Venmo. I stay at Venmo for another 2 years. I'm rocking out at Venmo. Over there, I'm leading the disputes team. I'm working on all these stuff. The team that I joined, we did $100 billion in total transaction volumes. So working on really big distributed architectures, right? Loving it, right? But I'm listening to the real hidden agendas, right? Venmo is not a profitable company. It's never been, right? Like, how does Venmo make money? If I ask you that right now, you're like, well, when I send money to my friends, it's free.
Right.
Right. So like they're not taking money from me. And you know that if you're sending money to a bank, the bank is always getting paid. So someone has to put that bill. So what's going on here? Right. Well, they're not making money. Right.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, all right, they're not making money and they're paying out all of these fees, right, to allow you to do this transfer and have this state, right? Well, who's footing the actual bill? Well, who owns Venmo? PayPal does.
Yep.
So somebody's footing the bill. But at some point, you got to think about it, right? Like, if I'm footing this bill, I can only do it for so long, right? And if you work for a company that has the bill foot for you, heads are gonna roll, right? So I'm watching. I worked there for 2 years, and I'm like, you know what? It's time for me to be out. Same thing. I'm out. 3 months later, my whole team got fired.
Ooh.
People reaching out to me, and I'm just like, yo, y'all gotta look. Y'all gotta look. It's not just writing code anymore. It's like it's much higher order. You got to talk to people. You got to figure out. You got to network. You got to understand what's going on. So now I'm at Spotify, not doing the same thing. Spotify is very cash flush.
Right.
We good. We chilling now. But I'm heading up the commerce engineering team, and we're working on products that allow musicians to buy and sell musical assets. So when you think about that, as like Jay-Z can sell like backing tracks, or Timberland can sell beats through the platform, so they can really sell the assets that are put together to make songs.
Yeah.
So we're allowing like kind of an eBay style buyer and seller market for like musical asset. So that's really cool. And then we're also unlocking some new ways for you to like spend money directly on Spotify. So new ad platforms that are specific to like launch dates and things like that. So like I manage the team that handles like all of the, well, I'm the tech lead for the team that handles all of the like transactional state and all the understandings of like what's going to happen, so that people can make these sorts of like payments and buy these specific types of products. So working on some really interesting things. Specifically, two of the major ones that we're launching are a feature that allows, again, buyers and sellers, both artists or both artist companies, to sell beats and backing tracks to each other. And then the other one is we launched this really interesting ad unit called Marquee. And it actually launched with The Weeknd setting up one of the first ones. And basically, it's anytime they're about to release a new piece of music or a new like album, inside the Spotify app, we actually like push out to their fans, hey, The Weeknd's dropping an album. And then they can click on it and like go into that and have a listening experience of like that new piece of work. So it's like a native ad unit only to the Spotify platform. If you heard anything about like Drake's release that just happened, I think he leveraged and used it too. So just working on a lot of really cool things that allow them to just like bind and connect and like, you know, buy some other stuff on Spotify.
Yeah, that's awesome. So is some of the kind of the marketplace stuff, the beat buying and stuff like that, is that going to be on another app that they're using exclusively, or is it going to show up natively in the?
Good question. So it's kind of twofold. So one of the things is we bought a couple companies that specialize in that stuff already. So they're coming over to the Spotify empire, if you will.
Okay.
But there's a secondary app that most people might not already know about, that Spotify already owns, and it's the artist app. So if you think about like listening to music, there's two sides of the coin, right? It's like the person consuming the music, and then there's the people who create the music. So like the Warner Brothers, the Drakes of the world, right? There's already a separate app for those creators to like upload their tracks and all that stuff. So I specifically work on that secondary app, which is like how music gets onto Spotify in the first place. And we're adding a lot of these new functionality to that side of the app. It's really the music creation side. So normal consumers will probably never even know that these things exist, but they'll be affected by them.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm part of what we call creator, or creator studio, and that's like where the creators think about like making music and applying it to the platform. And I'm specifically working on tools to help them either create music faster or get the word out that new music has been released faster.
Awesome.
So it's really geared towards helping them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're on Spotify, so you know what I'm saying.
Hey, hey, you
I
part of
love all the
podcast
updates.
mission.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey. Oh yeah,
So
you guys are going to be seeing some crazy stuff. We're hiring tremendously on the podcast front, and we really like that podcast space because it's a little bit different, right? Like the music industry is what the music industry is, and anyone who knows about it knows that like there's certain do's and don'ts because it's owned really by three major companies. I'm not going to say
right.
any names. I'm not trying to have Illuminati show up here or at your house. So we'll leave that to the side. But podcast is really this open free space,
Yeah.
which allows Spotify and other people to be really dominant in that market and really try to help. So you're going to see a lot of really interesting things come out of that podcast space. I think podcast is really a big one for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear that. So with all these kind of things you went through, did you have any kind of pushback when it came to like diversity and inclusion, when it came to, you know, some of the hurdles you may have had to overcome besides some of the initial ones you spoke about in your upbringing?
Yeah. I would say that a lot of my, and again, it's kind of now where I'm at. I would say a lot of the initial like trying to find a job, those things are still indicative of like a lot of the societal issues that we currently have, right? Like when I got my first when I got my that first degree at RVC, I tried applying for like Pfizer, Merck, all of those big companies, and they were like, no, only people that could work here have like bachelor's degrees, right? And I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. But I had a friend at the time graduated from the same school as me. I actually used to help him do his work, and his dad had worked at Merck and got him
Mm-hmm.
a job, right? So like
Wow.
here you telling me that everyone needs a bachelor's degree. A dude that I helped, dad works at the company, and now he got the job. So
Yeah.
long story short, there is still that, but I felt like a lot of that was like at the beginning of my journey. So which is part of the reason why I started my own company. I was like, all right, screw y'all, I'm just gonna start my own company, and then I just did it that way, right? Like
Yeah.
I did it through a different avenue. But I will say, like, once I already started getting all of the experience in, and I think people leverage the fact that you can just start a company and start building stuff for people because that counts as experience. Once
Yeah.
I had the experience, it was a game changer, right? Like
Right.
everybody's just like, come. It was like, come do the tests because every company is going to test you. You fill out the test, you do good on that, and then you're in, and you can just do the work. And then over time, you actually start finding that some of the companies won't even test you.
Yeah.
Like I, I've been in interviews where I just gave somebody my pedigree, and like they're like, "Cool, we want to hire you for this position," and I'm just like, I bet, right?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like, so, like, as you keep doing it and as you keep growing with it, like, it becomes a lot easier again. And that's for like the main job, which is writing the code. Everything else is always going to be a struggle, but like, you have to leverage what you know. Like, I know for a fact I have a master's in computational data science, right? So, like, I'm going to talk with that provider
Yeah.
again. And it's like now understanding that I'm in that position where I can show my power because at the end of the day, what's the worst that could happen? A company fires me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I could go get another job at another company, right? Like now you're sitting in that seat of power. So it's a little bit different from like when your parents was like, I worked at Johnson and Johnson for 20 years. Like that's not our norm anymore, right? Like they're battling for us. So it's like once you get through that initial like inertia to get in business, then the game changes and then you start grasping some of that power for yourself and then go at it. Just keep going at it. Just keep spending your time honing your craft, and like they're not going to be able to box you out.
Yeah. And that's definitely like one of those differences we were talking about where, you know, you created your own company. And so the way you think about being able to find money is different from somebody who, even if they're still coming up during this time and around the same age range as us, if they've only come up in corporate and they have student loans and all these things, they'll still have it in their mind like, well, I could start a company, I'm smart enough to do that, but they still don't know the process yet. You
Listen,
did the process and then got on, right?
so I'm glad you brought that up, and now you're gonna let me dig in, right? Oh, starting a company as my first job was probably the hardest thing I ever did, and
Oh
it
yeah.
actually kind of steered me away from wanting to do it again, right? Like because you have to flex a different muscle. Like gone is just engineering. It's well, I have to understand lead generation. I got to understand how to talk to people. Then I also have to do the code. So like it's one dude wearing all of these different hats. And I'm just like, damn, like the whole process of just like finding people, getting more leads and doing that, I hated it so much, which is why after 3 years of doing that, the first company that I already had that was like, yo, we want to take you on full time. I'm like, yo, I'm done. Right. But it wasn't really a concept of I was done because I was always curious. It was more of, you know what? Y'all are making money and y'all are chilling comfortable. Because I knew the CEO that wanted to bring me on, like, and like he was like driving like a Porsche, all that stuff. It's like, I actually just want to learn from you. I want to learn how you figured out how to make this easy. So I always stepped into these companies like, yo, I have something to learn here. I have a goal and an objective. Like, I want to go back to this company stuff, but I want to figure out how other companies are run. So I did that there. That company failed. I did it at Jack Threads. That company failed, and I learned about the downsides, right? Like I learned about how not to do it. I still haven't gotten to the company other than Spotify that showed me like the right way to do it, but I learned the things to avoid, right? So again, it's always that learning piece of it. It's like you always got to be curious about just more than your cup of tea. Just because you're going in there as an engineer doesn't mean you don't need to understand how revenue works. Yeah. Right, like how all of those numbers that they're showing you every time they do the quarterly earnings reports, you should actually listen to those. You know how many people that I know that like every quarter we do our earnings report, and like a large portion of our money, because they all give us RSUs, is affected by that, but people just don't listen to it. I'm just like, well, you don't even understand fundamentally how the company's operating, right? So like if you get fired, you won't even know when.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you gotta stay curious, you gotta stay up on that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I was just talking to this guy. I had him pull up while I was running my last team meeting and make me a spare key, a new key fob. And I asked him, you know, when he pulled up, I said, what made you get into this? Like, what made you think about it? Because I'm always interested in people's, you know, kind of what sparks their interest in something. And his totally made sense. He was working for, you know, one of the, you know, lockout companies, and he was already kind of doing this stuff, but not the key stuff. And then later on, he found out that the company was offering the key replacement service, but they weren't teaching him that, and they were charging like $200 for it and paying him like $17 an hour to do this. Listen. And so, but he said the way he found out was he ended up reading one of those reports, and he said the reports were super long, but he said for whatever reason this time he read it and he scrolled down to the bottom. He found out how much they were charging for it, how much he made. Then he researched how much the machine was, bought the machine himself, and he already had the experience of doing lockout work, so he leveraged that to get customers, and now he's, you know, he's making good money.
What you just talked about there is the same thing that we talked about, which is like the literacy, right? Like he didn't have it. As soon as he attained it, it allowed him to do X thing. Right. And it's all it was curiosity. He's like, here's this 500-page report. And again, I would say 90% of that report is absolute garbage. But it's designed and it's constructed that way to be like that thing that is a gatekeeper that keeps people out. It's the same thing when I talk to people about having my master's degree. I'm like, most of the words that I use when I'm talking to other people with master's degrees are like really convoluted ways of saying multiply and divide.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I talk about like a neural network, right? People are like, oh my God, it's a crazy machine learning concept. But like the fundamentals of that is linear equations. It's y equals mx plus b. That is 60% of all that this artificial intelligence craze is about. Like it's that, and then derivatives. And now you understand 80% of it. And you learn that stuff in high school. Yeah. Right. But like we rewrapped it, threw some new names on you, dropped it in a 50-page book, and now it's hidden.
And that's what they do. I mean, 100%. Me going through a lot of the, you know, I went through Google for Startups. So that's funny because you talked about WeWork, and I knew about WeWork a little early because we did Google through for Startups through a co-working space called Fuel Collective, and they've been around for like 10 years. So you know they were watching what was going on with WeWork. But yeah, so you know, I went through that, and then I went through Founder Gym, and then of course I met a lot of people, was able to ask a lot more questions, and now we just got into Beta, which is one of our big accelerators here in Minnesota, And then we also got into lunar startups, which is another one. So
make the moves.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'm excited about both of those. But you know, a lot of the stuff was just what you were saying, where it's like people using terms or abbreviations, and it's like, bro, I get a product, figure out how much it costs, figure out all these things, and then I go out, I find my customers, I sell, so I figured out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But and then you're not used to as well, like telling everybody everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like the startup space is different from like the small business space or even just being a native entrepreneur, because it's a difference when you meet somebody and the first time you meet them, like, so how much you making? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you profitable already? Like, what's your customer acquisition cost? Just all these questions that
Mm-hmm.
you're like, bro, I wouldn't even tell my mom that. Why are you asking me all this? But that's the landscape nowadays, right? And so it's a whole different.
And again, it's even worse than that. It's they're doing that for some other reasons, and we can talk about what those other
Yep.
reasons are, right? But fundamentally at its core, right, I think Elon has it right when he says, like, the concept of a startup is, are you generating a product that people are going to pay for at the end of the day, right? It's like product revenue, right? Like all of the other shenanigans that are around it are the parts that make this entire space so convoluted, right?
Yep.
Because they're asking you those questions, right? And then I would say, well, the rebuttal was, well, what was that for Clubhouse?
Right. Right.
Right? How much money did they make? But their last, their Series A, they were valued at $1 billion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And zero donut hole dollars brought in. Right?
Yeah.
And the only people that used it was VC.
And a tiny team.
A team of like 5 people.
Well,
and
yeah. When I got on, they were only at like 6 or 7, and then like 2 weeks later they're at 8. So like, yeah.
So what's their cost of acquisition? How much revenue are they bringing in?
Exactly.
Who's asking? But again, they had the right networks, right? They knew the right people to do and just make it happen. So again, it's like a lot of that stuff is like, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Like I walked into a bunch of meetings on tech, and are people asking me crazy questions, and I'm like, some of the meetings, like, because I don't, you met Jay, my business partner. Jay Freeman.
No, I don't think so.
All right, cool. So me and him, we launched a business together, a startup, and it's in the AI space, and we're talking that kind of stuff. And then, like, some of the time we will talk to a VC, and VCs would be like, "Well, can it actually be done?" And I'm just like, "Well, even if I told you, if I tell you it could, or I tell you it can't, there's no way for you to verify it, because you've never actually built anything. I'm talking to someone right. who's fundamentally just gone around and like pushed dollars around, right? So like, you asking me that question is an insulting question. I'm here with the degrees, having done the work, having worked at companies and like launched products that are $100 billion, and you're asking me if I can do it, when the only thing you've ever done is sat in this chair and like doled out $100,000 checks.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, you can't even actually comprehend the thing I'm trying to tell you. So like, what kind of question is that?
Yeah. And that's a real thing. Cause like, I just had this conversation with a investment crowdfunding platform, somebody from one of those. And you know, because they had reached out, they're actually trying to hire some, you know, have us help them hire some people. So we were talking about that, and then I had made a post about investors and kind of the ecosystem, and so we ended up talking, and I was like, well, tell me more about, you know, equity crowdfunding or investment crowdfunding. And so we had that conversation, but we both came to the same conclusion. For me, I was like, listen, these people pretend to be smart, and they're not as smart as they're pretending to be, but then they'll treat you like you're dumb and you know exactly what you're talking about, right?
100%.
And usually the piece that you're missing is not, like, for me, I came to this conclusion years ago, right? Maybe like 8 or 9 years ago, where I was thinking about like just intelligence and stuff like this, who's smart, and you know, because people became more opinionated over time, especially with social media and all this. And a lot of times people think people who have a lot of opinions are really smart, but a lot of people just have opinions about things and never really looked into what they actually have opinions about. And then you have a lot of people who, because you'll hear people say all the time like book smart, street smart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you break that down, to me, this is my personal opinion. When you break that down, book smart is somebody who learns something and remembers it, right?
Yeah.
And to me, street smart is comprehension, which is actually true intelligence.
Yep.
So I can go to somebody book smart and they're smart as long as we're only talking about the things that they remember that they
Exactly.
learned,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can
Which
go
is
to
what school
somebody
trains you to do, right? Just memorize
exactly, and
things.
you can go to somebody street smart and be like, "Hey, put this uniform on, and when we call you, go to these cars and use these set of tools and unlock it, and we'll pay you this." And then you, but you're not dumb because you don't know what they're really doing, what they're really charging. You just don't know yet, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But the moment he learned, he comprehended what was going on, and now
Mm-hmm.
he has his own business where he's making way more than he was before. He doesn't even have to be as big as them. He doesn't
Yep.
have to be their competition because if you go from $17 an hour to $200 an hour, well, even if you only did three of those a day, you're still defeating what you were just doing, right?
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
only doing a couple jobs. So to me, so when I looked at it and I'm like, just what you were mentioning when they're like, can you do this? It's like, are you book smart? Are you street smart? Do you have comprehension, or do you just only know what you know? Can if
Mm-hmm.
I explain this to you, will you understand it? And a lot of times when they condescend to, founders of color, black founders,
Yep.
women, it becomes a condescending thing versus like, hey, I just asked you what your CAC was. You don't know what CAC is, but you're actually not supposed to know what CAC is because it's an abbreviation for something. So let me
Agreed.
ask you in a different way and see if you comprehend that.
Yep.
What's your customer acquisition cost? And
Yep.
let me simplify it even more. Like, what does it cost you to get a customer?
Yep.
How much do you make on that? Now,
Agreed.
if somebody can't comprehend that, don't do a deal with them. But if
Exactly.
somebody's like, hey, you're right, you know what, I'm new to this, I never really broke it down like that, or oh, actually, I do know what that is. Let me tell you
Yep.
the conversation. And that's where the smart dumb comment comes in, where it's like a lot of them can't break those things down to you either because they're just copying what other people
Agreed.
have done. So this ecosystem is not really betting on hustlers and people who can get the job done. And it's more based on people who can speak the lingo,
Exactly.
have the right skin color, and have a project that you like. And that's
Yep.
all it is. And when I was in Google for startups, somebody came in, an investor, angel investor, and he's talking all this. I mean, if I say white privilege, white male, rich white guy, whatever you imagine, that's what he
Yeah.
was, right? The hair, everything, right? And he's just sitting there like, why am I even here with these
Yep.
peasants? And the first he as soon as he starts up, he's like, so who's researched me? I'm looking through my stuff, but I'll tell you right now, and for anybody listening, I
Mm-hmm.
was the kid in school when do everybody do the wave, I'm breaking the wave.
Yep.
I don't go do for mind control. I don't
Mm-hmm.
do group participation unless I've pre-approved that I'm gonna do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes if I don't answer a question in a group, it's not because I don't have an answer, because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I
Mm-hmm.
just want to see how everybody else responds. I'm an observer, right?
Yep.
So I'm actually going through my stuff, getting out my notebook. But one person I think said he did, and most of the people was like, no, and he just starts going in on everybody. He's like, well, that's your first mistake, you may never see me again, so you should research whoever you're meeting with and blah blah blah. And in my head I'm like, bro,
Why?
you're not here to invest in nobody, you're here because they asked you to be here. Don't
Yep.
you know
Why?
what I'm saying? But I just kept it cool. And then he just continued that in, and then he goes into how he was an engineer and he did this, and I think he worked for NASA at some point, and he sold companies, all this cool stuff, very impressive, cool,
Mm-hmm.
cool, cool. But you got to understand, we know you're not here to put no money into us. You're here to
Mm-hmm.
speak. So come
Yeah.
speak and to answer our questions. That's really the
Yep.
the transaction, right?
Yep.
And we had two women in our cohort. One of them I think didn't make it, but the one who was there, he like super, like, I don't like the terms mansplaining and womansplaining because people a lot of times just use that when they really actually don't understand what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I'm saying? And But in this case, like he really was like on that with her because he like said something. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he's like, "Do you get it?" And everybody's like, "Yeah." And then he just like looked at her and he's like, "Do you understand?" And she was like, "Yeah, I get it." And then he's like, "Oh, because your face expression says that you don't." And she's like, "Well, how does my face look?" So he was just on that energy the whole
Yeah.
time. But what I loved was one of the guys asked, he said, "How many?" He said, "So out of your investments, like how many of them actually work out for you?" And he was
Ooh.
like, he's
There
like,
we
out
go.
of 10, like maybe five. And he was lying. He
Lie.
didn't even want to
Lie.
answer that.
Lie.
He didn't
Lie.
even want to
100%.
answer that, right?
Lies.
And
100%.
so
He said 50%. Shame
yeah,
on him.
50%
Nah.
are winning for him.
Nah. Nah.
And it's
Nah.
just like, and it's just like as like I said, as like a hustler in the positive sense of somebody who gets
Mhm.
things done and goes hard and figures stuff out, has great comprehension. It's like, bro, you would that might have been true if you invested in black companies and you didn't require everybody to be a billion dollar.
Exactly.
Like, so you're losing on, even if it's true, right? You're
Yeah.
losing on 50% of your deals, but we're too risky.
Yeah.
You would literally accidentally come up if you just did it as charity to test it out. Like,
Exactly.
okay, they seem kind of smart. Let me give them 100,000 each, see what
Yeah.
happens. I
Yeah.
guarantee you, even if you thought those were going to be the losers in the company, that would surprise you and be winners. Like,
Listen.
it's just ridiculous, man. It's crazy.
I do have another meeting, so I have to go, but I want to
No
drop
problem.
off for one more gem before that. I think it's funny that he said 50%. We know that's not the real,
Right.
but I think the world of VC has just gotten so crazy because it really came from humble beginnings, right? Like
Mm,
it started off with like engineers and like really smart hustling mentality people, right? Saying we need a vehicle to invest in idea creation, right? Like products, right? And then after 2008 and all the shenanigans that happened with like the financial crisis around housing, they were like, all right, finance bros said we need a new vehicle to park our assets into. And that really is where we sit kind of now,
yeah.
right? Because like if you look at it, right, one of the biggest funds that was started was one of the ones that invested what $19 billion in WeWork, right? The guys over at SoftBank, right?
Yeah.
They were giving $100 billion to invest.
Mm.
They invested $80 billion in 2 years and turned all of that money into zero. And you would imagine those are the smartest, most sophisticated
Right.
investors in the world, right? But it's basically a crapshoot, right? It's just like
Yeah.
you give a man $1 billion, he spends $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
It's just darts at the wall, darts
Yeah.
at the
And it's
wall.
crazy because it's required for you to give it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also crazy because the logic behind giving the amounts isn't really logic, it's
Nope.
laziness, right?
Yep.
Like they'll say all these things, right? You have to be this. We have to see that you can be a multi-billion dollar. We want to see 100 times return, 10 times return, 5 times, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But then when you're really like, what's the real reason? It's like, well, we got $10
Mm-hmm.
million to invest and we don't want to check in on 50 companies. So we're going to pick 10 companies and give
Mm-hmm.
them each $1 million, and
Yeah.
7 of them are going to fail, and one of them may do really good and the other 2 may do okay and at least
So
break
that's the
even,
name of the
right?
game. Exactly. That's the name of the game. It's like, yo, if you spread the darts out enough, one of them needs to just be big enough to
Yeah.
return the entire pot.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I went to school like you went to school. If 1 out of 100 companies succeeds, you have a 1% like pass like ratio, right? On
Yeah.
that. That's still failure.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? Like,
Yeah.
what are we talking about?
Yeah, it does it. So that's why I'm glad I was in those programs and I was able to expand my network, because then I was able to really get to the root of like what's really going on here, like what's the problem. And it's basically there is no problem. It's just designed. It's designed with a flaw in it,
Of
and
course.
it doesn't work. And then everybody's following suit because, like you just mentioned, you assume these are the smartest people in the world,
Yep.
and they're not. And some of them are very smart, but they're very book smart, right? And so they're not investing in hustlers because they're not hustlers themselves,
Yep.
right?
Agreed.
I've talked to somebody who's part of the fund that Jeff Bezos is in, and she's like, we don't want to hear about your exit strategy. If we hear about that, we assume you're not serious about building it. We want to be in it for 5 to 7 years, or whatever. And then I've talked to people who are like, yo, if we don't hear about your exit strategy, if you don't know how you're going to get there, then we don't believe that you have a game plan to get there with our money, and we want to be out of it in 3 to 5 years. And so it's
Interesting.
just all, yeah. And it
I
may
know
be,
someone who sold a company to Amazon and she no longer works there. So I'm
yeah.
pretty sure. Yeah, it's weird. Okay.
So it's a yeah, it's a weird, and it is, and it's almost like double talk, because not that they don't want you to be able to do that, obviously, but they're saying we want you to be passionate enough that you're like in it. So when we're in it with you, we're in it together. And I actually was on Clubhouse the other night, and somebody mentioned this, something along the same lines of like, if you're already talking about your exit strategy, you're not passionate enough for us as a founder. And actually on Shark Tank too, Barb has said that to founders when they're like, yeah, my goal is to da da da, and then we'll be able to exit. And she's like, I don't trust you because you already went out. And it's like, if you get somebody who's really super passionate about their stuff, you're not as an investor, you're not going to want to work with them, because they're not going to take direction.
Mhm.
They're not gonna. They're not when an opportunity does come to sell, they're gonna be like, no, I can grow it, I can take it. And for me as a creative
Getting
and a
stopped to the
founder,
moon, right?
yeah, exactly. And like for me as like a creator and entrepreneur, I wear both hats, where I have things where I'm like, I don't want to sell this. I want to have it. I want it to be a legacy. And I have things where I'm like, yeah, we're gonna build it. It's a multi-billion-dollar market. We can get there. But I may not be the person to take it to that level. I may be able to take it to a certain level, get acquired, and then somebody else can take it even further and can be happy with that as well, right? Because that's still an accomplishment. And so it's a lot of games. It's a lot of really personal opinions being spouted as facts, and just different methodology and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of people holding the money don't know what to do with it. They're just pretending.
Yep. Agreed. The greatest way to summarize
For
it.
sure. So yeah, like I said, I know you got another meeting you got to get to. So I appreciate your time, and I'll just end with if you have any advice that you want to give to future Black people that are interested in getting into tech and just kind of jumping on this journey, whether it be corporate or entrepreneurship.
I give you the advice that I give all of my students. Persistence is the name of the game, but in chair. If you want to be an engineer, the best way to do it is to sit in a chair and write code,
Yeah.
period. The distance between you and me, right, is time in chair. That's it. I've been doing this for 11 years. That's it. That's the only thing that separates me from any of my students. I've been doing this for 11 years, right? If I was to give up when I failed out, when I did horribly at the University of Maryland, I wouldn't be where I was today. It's just like staying curious, hopping on it, saying I'm going to spend the time and do this tough thing. That persistence and that resilience got me to where I am today.
Awesome. Awesome. I know that'll be well received and much appreciated. Once again, it's BTT Discussions, Black Tech Talent Podcast. Surfield, thank you for being a guest.
Hey, my
And we
pleasure.
out.
All right. Peace.